Hello everyone. As many of you will know, I recently finished my year abroad in Germany. Now, safe to say, that year was pretty insane. But that's not really what this video is about. Instead, I'd like to show you a quick vlog I made from my last 4 days in Germany, in which I was finally able to visit the beautiful city of Hamburg.
Guten Morgen Heidelberg, zum allerletzten Mal.
On the day of my trip, I woke up early enough to go for a little walk. I went round the city, paying my respects to some familiar places, before finally heading to the station, where I caught a rather crowded train to Frankfurt. As I waited excitedly for my second train of the day, I realised I would not be escaping the punctuality of Deutsche Bahn on this particular weekend. But at least I was headed in the right direction, and it gave me plenty of time to research some potential activities to do in Hamburg. By mid-afternoon, I finally pulled into the city and made my way to my hotel, which is lucky since immediately after it started pouring. However, I still wanted to explore the city that evening, so I summoned all my British resilience and headed out into the downpour. My destination for this first evening was the Miniatur Wunderland, but on the way I met some seagulls, who were just as loud but seemingly less aggressive than the ones I'm used to in Llandudno. After enjoying the architecture in the Speicherstadt, I headed to the Miniatur Wunderland, which was one of the most incredible things I've ever seen. I cannot emphasize this enough. They had a Monaco Grand Prix set with moving cars and live cameras and a leaderboard. They had sets for Italy, Austria, the Swiss Alps. They had a day-night cycle where Mount Vesuvius in the corner would erupt. Just every single one of the many sets they had was so unbelievably detailed and impressive. One of the most impressive was the airport, which I didn't get much good footage of, but the planes take off and land, it's insane. I finally left the Miniatur Wunderland at around 10 p.m, feeling rather reflective and taking in the wonderful city around me.
Ich kann nur sagen, das Miniatur Wunderland war wirklich ein Wunderland. Es war unglaublich. Es war so schön. Die Menge an Figuren und Autos und Züge und so weiter war absolut unfassbar. Es war absolut atemberaubend.
I then made the genius move of getting on the wrong bus and had to learn a lot more about the night buses in Rellingen than I ever intended to, but that's by the by. Eventually, I got back to my hotel and slept, ready for an exciting second day in Hamburg. Friday began with a trip to Aldi Nord, which I've been looking forward to all year, since Heidelberg only has Aldi Süd. Even more excitingly, Aldi Nord apparently has merch.
Moin Leute, ich habe komplett vergessen, überhaupt Videos zu machen bei meinem ersten Besuch zu einem Aldi Nord in meinem ganzen Leben. Ich freue mich seit Jahren auf diesen Moment und ich war einfach so begeistert, da zu sein. Ich habe vergessen, dass ich einen Vlog machen soll. Ich mache vielleicht in einem Moment ein Haul.
Fortunately, I had just enough time for the haul before my train.
Ich habe Äpfel gekauft. Ich habe eine sehr, sehr leckere Vielfalt an Backwaren gekauft. Und zwar ein Franzbrötchen, ein Schoko-Franzbrötchen, ein Kopenhagener. Die Hoodies waren eine echte Verführung, aber ich habe diese Verführung widerstanden. Aber die Socken nicht. Ich habe Aldi Nord Socken gekauft.
Next, I headed towards the Volksparkstadion, the home ground of Hamburg SV. On the way, I noticed the fans are pretty passionate with their stickers. The stadium itself was pretty big and impressive. I particularly liked this statue I found outside, as well as this mural I saw on a wall. While I was initially planning to just visit the museum, I was talked into also joining the stadium tour, which allowed us to walk out onto the pitch, or where the pitch would have been if they weren't preparing for an Ed Sheeran concert that day, and also get a picture on the press conference podium, which I was not expecting at all but was a welcome surprise. After the stadium tour, the next thing on my agenda was the Speicherstadt Museum in the historic warehouse complex near the port. But on the way there, this caught my eye.
Nett hier abfahren Sie schon mal in Baden-Württemberg.
Thoroughly amused by the sticker, I went happily into the museum and was genuinely intrigued and enjoyed learning about the history of this part of the city. I also made some memes while I was there. By now, it was early evening, so I enjoyed a lovely meal and a beer which, according to the menu, was from the barrel in a beautiful restaurant in the Portuguese Quarter, before heading back out for a tranquil walk by the port. Well, it was tranquil apart from this. On the way back to my hotel, I finally got to travel using the U-Bahn and took this surprisingly cinematic shot, if I may say so, which may or may not have been inspired by Fettes Brot's Da draußen. Anyway, I was feeling pretty pleased with everything I'd managed to see on Saturday, but I was also keen to get back to my hotel and sleep, ready for an exciting day 3.
Moin, das Wetter ist unglaublich schön, vor allem im Vergleich zu den letzten 2 Tagen. Und ich freue mich auf Dänemark.
That's right. I had pretty big plans for this particular day. After making my way to Flensburg in the far north of Germany, I eventually got a train to Padborg, just on the Danish side. My first goal was to take a picture directly on the border, but knowing where the border was more difficult than you might think, since Google Maps wasn't loading.
Ich frage mich, ob das die Grenze hindeutet. Aktuell habe ich keine mobilen Daten, deswegen bin ich nicht völlig sicher. Das ist ein bisschen beunruhigend, aber ich habe ein kleines Gebäude, das theoretisch direkt an der Grenze liegt, gefunden. Und vor diesem Gebäude war es eine Karte für Touristen und so weiter mit ein bisschen Informationen. Die Informationen waren auf Dänisch, aber ich habe ein bisschen verstanden. Ich glaube, ich bin jetzt wieder in Deutschland. Aber ich möchte am besten ein Schild finden, das die Grenze klar hindeutet, damit ich ein Selfie machen kann. Wie gesagt, ich glaube, ich habe es gefunden. Ich glaube, ich habe den Grenzestein gefunden. Ja, das sieht genauso aus. Grenzestein. Keine Ahnung, wie man das ausspricht. Ich sollte das googeln. Aber Zeit für ein Selfie. Die wichtigste Aufgabe des Tages ist schon erledigt. Aber ich möchte noch, falls möglich, ein echtes Grenzeschild finden. Okay, auf meiner Mission, Deutschland oder die deutsche Grenze zu finden, habe ich gerade ein Schild gesehen, das Tyskland sagt. Wow. Anscheinend bin ich gleichzeitig in 5 Ländern. Wow, ich habe es gefunden. Das Schild, das ich gesucht habe. Warte mal. Endlich auf der Grenze.
I then headed back through the station to the other side of the town, where I got some delicious sorbet. Shortly after, it started to rain, so I headed to the safety of Padborg Library, where I found a very interesting Danish book about nature. I didn't understand much of it, but the pictures were nice, and I enjoyed making some memes out of it. I sat in this cozy chair in this beautiful Danish library until it was time for my train.
Okay, ich bin wieder im Bahnhof und es gibt überhaupt niemanden.
In the waiting room, I enjoyed the Schoko Franzbrötchen from earlier and did some writing. I also tried this can of what I think is non-alcoholic Danish beer. I genuinely cannot remember what it tasted like, but I think it was okay. I didn't film much of the journey home because I was quite tired, but I was very happy with how the day had gone. Sunday was a very early start. I had just enough time to show off my Aldi socks before heading out the door.
Guten Morgen. Moin. Es ist 6:30 Uhr und ich möchte zum Fischmarkt. Aber ich hatte keine Ahnung, dass die Busse erst um so 9 Uhr am Sonntag fahren. Also muss ich zum Bahnhof Pinneberg laufen. Komm, Alter, komm schnell.
When I made it onto the S-Bahn and caught my breath a bit, I couldn't help but smile to myself at the situation.
Oh, wow. Hier ist der Fischmarkt.
The market was just as exciting as I'd hoped it would be. It took me a little while to find the fish, and when I did, I wasn't exactly sure what I wanted because, honestly, I had not thought that far in advance. So, while I mulled it over, I decided to look at some of the other stalls and found this guy selling fruit who was funnier than most stand-up comedians. I mean, look at the size of the crowd. Back to the fish situation though, I made some progress by asking a local which stall had the best Fischbrötchen, or fish sandwiches. After getting some cash, I went back to the stall and selected my sandwich.
Also, am Ende habe ich ein Aalfilet gekauft, was vielleicht ein bisschen, weiß ich nicht, ein bisschen komisch klingt. Das ist eigentlich deutlich besser, als ich erwartet habe. Wow. Ich kann Aal empfehlen, Leute.
After thoroughly enjoying my Brötchen, I found another stall owner who seemed to be incredibly good at stand-up comedy. I think I genuinely spent like 15 minutes just watching that Dutch florist entertain the crowd with jokes, but eventually I moved on and explored the rest of the market. I deduced that this end of the market was mainly dedicated to non-fish items, and feeling fairly satisfied with what I'd seen of the market, I headed back up onto the street, where I discovered to my surprise that the Hamburg Half Marathon was taking place that day. Now, watching thousands of people jog past you while someone blasts Eye of the Tiger was surprisingly motivating, considering I wasn't actually doing anything. Well, I say I wasn't doing anything. It did actually inspire me to a different type of activity. I took one of these hire bikes and just kind of went for a spontaneous little ride. I didn't really have anything on the agenda for Sunday except the fish market, so I felt quite free to just explore until I found something particularly interesting. Namely, this. So, it turns out if you get a day pass on public transport in Hamburg, that includes the ferries. I was obviously not going to pass up an opportunity like that. In the end, I got a few ferries back and forth, before eventually alighting at this beautiful spot on the bank of the River Elbe.
Das ist Strandsommer, Baby. Okay, ich werde das möglicherweise bereuen. Ich würde so gerne die Elbe zumindest einmal berühren. Also versuche ich das zu machen, ohne dass ich oder mein Handy hin. Oh, meine Schuhe wären beinahe nass geworden.
My penultimate destination for the day was Schumacher's Biergarten, next to the Stadtparksee. Now, I either forgot to film anything in the Biergarten, or I chose not to. I genuinely can't remember which, but fortunately it had this lovely little pond next to it, where people were racing remote-controlled boats.
Also, ich habe erfolgreich gebiergarten. Nächstes Ziel, die Zentralbibliothek. Es war eigentlich deutlich schwieriger, die Bibliothek zu finden, als ich erwartete. Aber zumindest gibt es diese zwei riesige Leute hinter mir.
In the library cafe, I enjoyed a light tea and read the local paper for a bit. That was pretty much it for Sunday.
Hallo Leute, fantastischer Tag, fantastische Stadt. Ich bereue gar nicht, dass ich hierher gekommen bin.
I had just enough time to watch the local Hamburg news before bed. But Monday, my final morning in Hamburg, would prove to be another early start.
Guten Morgen Rellingen und guten Morgen Deutschland zum allerletzten Mal in diesem Jahr. Ich bin jetzt im Flughafen. Ich habe meinen großen Koffer schon aufgegeben. Ich muss nur noch die Sicherheitskontrolle passieren. Also bis gleich. Ich habe es geschafft. Ich brauche kein Magnet. Ich brauche kein Magnet. Ich brauche kein Magnet. Ich brauche kein Magnet. To quote one of my favorite sketches from the comedians Foyle Arms and Hogg. Final call for all passengers for the Ryanair flight today, now boarding at a gate that couldn't possibly be further away.
Approximately 1 marathon later, I got to my gate and discovered my flight had been delayed by an hour. Nonetheless, we eventually took off and I made it back to Stansted. Although there were still a few trains ahead of me, and some delays, this is the UK after all, it felt good to be on the way home. I had very much enjoyed my 4 days in Hamburg, and a lot of my previous 9 months in Germany too. But right now, on this extremely slow Avanti train, I was very much looking forward to a good rest. And boy was I about to get it.